So, Naftali Bennett, who is now the Israeli prime minister, who replaced Netanyahu, and is purportedly, even more right-wing than Netanyahu. I want to play you a clip of Naftali Bennett a few years ago. Just take a look.
In conjunction with My Israel has arranged instruction day for wiki editors. The goal of the day is to teach people how to edit in Wikipedia, which is the #1 source of information today in the world. As a way of example, if someone searches the Gaza flotilla, we want to be there. We want to be the guys who influence what is written there, how it's written, and to ensure that it's balanced and Zionist in nature.
I came here to learn more about how we as Israelis and as Jews can defend Israel online, on the internet, and particularly in Wikipedia in this case. Wikipedia is a bit of a complex system, and it's sometimes hard to figure out the rules. I've personally tried to edit things in Wikipedia that were against Israel, small things, and my changes were erased or undone, and I didn't understand why. And I think that this kind of knowledge is important for anyone who wants to be active in defending Israel on the internet, so that we can go and we can see the information and we can say this isn't quite right, it's showing one side of the story, and I have the power and the right to change that. And in general, it's so important for us to be online, working to defend ourselves and to prove to the world and to ourselves that we are just and we are right. And because right now, if you look online, if you do searches for certain terms related to Israel, it's just filled with anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and garbage. And there's not enough of us out there working to counteract that and make sure that the other side of the story, our side of the story, and our right side of the story is getting the right coverage and the coverage.
So this is really funny, right? Naftali Bennett says that they want people to get news that is Zionist and so balanced and Zionist in nature, which is a complete contradiction of terms, right? You can see here, this is just one example of a workshop where, you know, they're teaching people how to edit Wikipedia, to reframe things in a light that is favorable to Israel, right? To paint Israel in a good light. And as Naftali Bennett himself mentioned, the Gaza flotilla. So some of you may recall some very brave people tried to break the siege on Gaza. Just civilians, right? They brought supplies with them and food, since, you know, Gazans can't leave. They can't import certain things. Israel controls what they're allowed to bring in. And, you know, they tried to break the siege. And the Israeli military, the Israeli occupation forces, actually stormed their boat, like as if there was some bunch of terrorists. Like, how dare you bring food to people in Gaza? And so he said that, you know, just as an example, they want to be the ones who are in charge of, you know, who have narrative control. They want to be the ones, the Israelis want to be the ones, giving a balanced view of things about themselves, right? Totally not subjective. So this is a big problem over here, because not only is this manipulation of news, manipulation of facts, of history, of the present, of contemporary events, and of war crimes and occupation, but it is part of a larger problem, because this is not just about Wikipedia. Okay, this is also about, for example, I can just show you this article from none other than Glenn Greenwald in The Intercept from a few years back. Let me read you the title. Facebook is collaborating with the Israeli government to determine what should be censored. This is from 2016. So yeah, that's not a joke. The Israeli government had meetings with Facebook, right? And they still do, as far as we know. They still tell Facebook what to take down, right? So people who are activists for Palestine, who post something that is critical of Israel, they will just straight up ban their pages, right? And it's not only that, it's also about the criteria and the training. When Facebook you know, shapes its policy over what it allows, what it doesn't allow, they say that they allow criticism of Israel. That's not the case, right? Because if you look at a recent article, which actually was from The Intercept, and it's from May 2021, this year. This is another article from Sam Biddle. Facebook's secret rules about the word Zionist impede criticism of Israel. So, you know, in May, when Israel was attacking Gaza, they were bombing the crap out of it. Many people were, of course, outraged because the whole time, all the time, Palestinians are suffering under Israeli occupation. But when Israel launches ground invasions of Gaza and aerial bombardments, I mean, it's a slaughter. And what it turns out that during this attack in May, which lasted 11 days, this massacre, right? This is what happened. Both Facebook and Instagram are facing allegations of censorship following the erratic, widespread removal of recent posts from pro-Palestinian users critical of the Israeli government, including those who documented instances of Israeli state violence. Okay? And if you go down here and look at their criteria, so someone gave them, leaked documents to them about what criteria they use, it turns out that, for example, when it comes to what they remove, this is their criteria, right? So if someone, for example, says that Israeli settlers refuse to leave houses built on Palestinian territory, and that's a post, they will remove it, they'll delete it. Or if a comment says fuck Zionists, they'll delete it. Now, obviously, I certainly agree with the premise. You should not confuse Zionists with Jews. Not all Jews are Zionists. In fact, if you go to the United States, you have evangelical Christians, these like complete fucking nut jobs who support Israel. They're not Jewish, but they're certainly Zionists, right? And you have Israelis who are not Zionists, who are born in Israel or occupied Palestine, but are anti-Zionism, right? So you should, of course, not confuse the two. Zionism is an ideology, a political ideology that was, founded in Vienna, and it's, barely 100 years old. Judaism is a religion that has existed for thousands of years. So, you can't substitute one for the other. I agree with that. The problem is, in Facebook's policy, which is also Instagram's policy, because Facebook owns Instagram, they are making it basically impossible to criticize anything Zionist, because they say that, if you say the word Zionist in a certain context, then you must absolutely certainly mean Jews, and therefore we must remove the post. So look, this is what they say. So if the post says Israeli settlers refuse to leave houses built on Palestinian territory, they'll delete it. Or if there's a comment that says F Zionist, they'll delete it. But here, if you say Zionist movement turned 60 and it says Zionists are awful, I really hate them all, they won't do anything. And down here, Sam Biddle, what does he say? Critics noted that the first example is tied to a frequent and often violent real-world event, seizures of Palestinian homes by Israeli settlers, almost always carried out with justifications rooted in ideological Zionism or Israeli government policies themselves rooted in Zionism. The advocates who question Facebook's rules on the term Zionist worry they would collapse denunciations of such action and state policies into hate speech against Jews, making it difficult to criticize Israel online at all. So do you see the issue here? So it's not just, the broader point here is that it's not just something about Wikipedia. It's, you have tech companies, like Facebook, Instagram, who are making it virtually impossible to criticize Israel. Now, I must add that on the other hand, around this time, just before I think the slaughter happened in May, I posted a video here on YouTube, also on Instagram, criticizing Israel, standing up for Palestinians, and it went viral on Instagram. It went viral on every platform. On Instagram, it has almost 2 million views. So that may be perhaps lucky. Maybe it's the exception that confirms the rule, but I need to say that that did not happen to me, thankfully. In the past, however, I have posted things, for example, showing something that happened to Palestinians. YouTube, restricted it, or Instagram did restrict it, right? So just because it didn't happen to me doesn't mean it didn't happen to others. It has happened to others. This is true, right? The point here that I want to talk about is that the people who advise Facebook are Israeli government officials, right? You have people from Israel telling Facebook what to take down. I mean, come on, this is, could you imagine if Syria was doing that? Just imagine the outrage. Oh my God, Bashar al-Assad is censoring people on social media. Like Facebook wouldn't even listen to that, right? But in this case, it's not a problem. Let me just show you this, going back again to this article from Glenn, which is older, right? So the Associated Press reports today from Jerusalem that, quote, the Israeli government and Facebook have agreed to work together to determine how to tackle incitement on the social media network. These meetings are taking place as the government pushes ahead with legislative steps meant to force social networks to rein in content that Israel says incites violence. Now, this is the problem, because when they say incites violence, they've been using this in occupied Palestine to arrest Palestinians who criticize them. So Palestinians who are living under Israeli military occupation, they've been arresting them. Many articles about this. This is from 2016. I'm just going to read you this very quickly. In the morning of August 28th, 2014, 2 days after the end of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, Sohaib Zahda hopped into a shared taxi in Hebron that was going to Ramallah, where he had a job interview. Okay? 33-year-old Zahda, who owns a paintball company, is an unlikely terrorist. Now, he said that to get between Hebron and Ramallah, Palestinians must pass through the container checkpoint manned by Israeli soldiers on a road that connects the southern West Bank to its central and northern cities. At the checkpoint, named for a shipping container once located at the barrier, Palestinian pedestrians queue up to get their IDs checked. Okay, and they inspect the cars. So when Zahda got there, they took his mobile phone and his bag and brought him to a room near the checkpoint. After 2 hours, he was told he was being investigated for threatening an Israeli army leader. The alleged threat was made on a Facebook page calling for an uprising in Hebron. Zahda was then blindfolded and placed in an Israeli military jeep. And then they took him to a counter-terror unit. So, I mean, this is absolutely insane. It's not the only case. It's not the only case. Just look at this also down here, right? So, in that year alone, the Israeli Attorney General opened 155 investigations into alleged social media incitement. Okay? And in the previous paragraph, what do they say? Since October 2015, since then, Israeli security forces have arrested about 400 Palestinians for social media activity. I mean, this is really outrageous. Could you just imagine if they were doing this in other countries? I mean, they accuse other countries of doing this the whole time, right? They say, oh, in Cuba, you can't say anything, against the regime. They will arrest you. You can't say anything in Iran against the regime, against Syria and the regime. They will arrest you. There's no freedom of speech. What the fuck is that? You know how they always say Israel is like the only democracy in the Middle East? You call that freedom of speech? No one is inciting violence. This is bullshit, right? They're just arresting people who are criticizing them because when people hear the truth outside Palestine, this is very problematic for them. Right? Israel always needs to maintain narrative control. This is very important for them because they've been trying to frame their country, their occupation as a country. That's my point. They're trying to say that, no, this is, a sovereign state and, this is our land and there were no Palestinians here and Palestinians are terrorists. Yes, but this is not the reality. You have people who are dual citizens and then Palestinians don't even have one citizenship. They're denied a state. They're under military occupation. They're butchered at 10 times the rate. It's just completely unfair. It's not even close. So Palestinians are not the threat. They are the victims. But they don't want this reality getting out, whether it's about Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, where they're trying to evict Palestinians from their homes, whether it's about Gaza, when they massacre people in Gaza. 65% of the people who died in that war in 2014 were civilians. Most of them died in or near their homes. They targeted residential buildings, war crimes, right? So they need to maintain narrative control. And this is why they try so desperately to stop people on Wikipedia from writing things that, Israel doesn't like. They don't even want Palestinians to talk on social media about this, to spread the word amongst themselves, amongst Palestinians, or to the world, right? About what's happening, about the conditions that they're living under. When I was covering Sheikh Jarrah just a few months ago, I had Zakaria on the show, right? Zakaria is Zakaria Oude. He's a resident in Sheikh Jarrah, in this neighborhood where they're trying to evict Palestinian families. One of the activists, they arrested him. One of the journalists, they arrested him. They just took him. They're trying to, censor people who criticize them abroad and inside the occupied territories. And just look at in the UK. This whole purge that they're doing in the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, they ruined him, right? They kicked him out of the party. They're still trying to get rid of anyone who's remotely pro-Palestinian. I mean, even for the mildest things, right? In the United States, they're trying to go very heavily against BDS. You even have some states where you have to sign a pledge that you will not criticize Israel. Like, this is some authoritarian bullshit, man. This is some dystopian shit. Could you imagine being forced to sign something that you won't criticize Saudi Arabia, or else you get fired from your job? What the fuck? Like, they say, like, this is the United States. This is a free country. That's no fucking free country, first of all. Also, are you sure you're the United States? Why are you not allowed to criticize another country? I mean, it would be already bad enough if you couldn't criticize your own country, right? Because that wouldn't be right. But you get punished, you get fired for refusing to sign a pledge that you won't criticize Israel. What is that? And this has happened to many teachers, right? You've had people also being canceled, like, we won't let them speak at this college because they're critics of Israel, and of course they try to smear them as anti-Semites. This is really, I mean, look at Leila Khalid, for example, right? This is last year. They banned her from Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube to stop her from talking. You know how they always say, like, oh, women's emancipation, women's rights. And then when a Palestinian woman wants to talk, they're like, shut the fuck up. No. All women can speak except Palestinian women. I wonder why. I wonder why you don't want to hear from Palestinian women. Huh? I wonder why. Because they would embarrass you. They would expose you. That's why. And, of course, we looked at this before. PayPal joining with ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, who is extremely, political. By all means, everyone should be fighting racism. Everyone should be fighting anti-Semitism. But criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitism. And the ADL conflates the two. So they try to portray critics of Israel as being anti-Semites. This is, no. You can't come here and say, Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East, and then do shit like this. In democracies, you have freedom of speech. I don't think there's any such thing as an ideal democracy. But, just if we're going to entertain them and their propaganda, it doesn't make any sense, would it? Right? So not only are they trying to censor Palestinians, they go to such lengths in the UK, in the United States, everywhere to make you shut the fuck up. Because they don't want people finding out what is happening in occupied Palestine. They cannot. Right? They're trying to rewrite history and rewrite the present. There's a really striking video that I showed you before. She says these things, right? This video is extremely...
You want us to make you look good? That's not my job. Your job is to make us look good. Our job is not to make you look good, American Jews. What do you have to worry about? Your job is to make us look good. And here's how you do it. Every one of us has to serve 3 years in the army, 2 years in the army, some of us 5 years, and then for the rest of our lives, you have got to serve 2 or 3 years in the army of words. You've got to learn to fight the political battle, which is even more important at this point than the military battle that we are. We'll fight the military battle. We're not asking you necessarily to come and be lone soldiers, although some of you can. You've got to learn how to fight back on the campuses, how to make the arguments. Now, they keep shifting. The ground keeps shifting under us. They keep changing the language. Intersectionality wasn't even a word 10 years ago. Now suddenly it's intersectionality. You've got to stay on top of it. And you know how we train for the army? We don't train for defensive warfare. If the war against Israel ever had to be fought on Israeli soil, do I have to tell you? It's an impossibility. So it's the same thing. Don't let the war of words ever be fought about Israel's nature. Let it be fought about why you can't accept Israel, why you have to single out this tiny people. Try to find Israel on the map. It's hardly there.
Have you tried finding Palestine on the map? I can't see it either, for some reason. So, I mean, this is, of course, this is a bit of an extreme example. But this is the mentality behind it. You have people like her, this Harvard professor, who shape these policies, who come and tell Facebook and other tech companies to censor people who criticize Israel, And then, of course, they try to do this whole smear that, they're anti-Semitic. What is this bullshit? First of all, there are Jews who are not Israelis. In Syria, in Damascus, we have a Jewish ghetto, a Jewish quarter. I was talking with Roni, my cousin, about that. The Jews and the Palestinians in Damascus live together in the Jewish quarter. Like they act as if all Jews have to be Israeli. What the fuck? There are Jews in Iran as well. Like why are they trying to monopolize like an entire religion just to save face for their political cause? This is insane. And regardless of that, the fact that, you know, they call themselves democratic and they are, you know, pro free speech and everything, and they call all the Arab nations dictators. So what is this? You arrest people for criticizing? No. So she said something very revealing. You know, she said that don't let it be about the nature of Israel. Yeah, what is the nature of Israel? It's an illegal occupation. The Golan Heights in Syria are illegally occupied. It's not my opinion. It's international law, right? Even the U.S. agreed on that. The West Bank, illegally occupied, right? East Jerusalem, illegally occupied. Palestinians don't have a state. This is not fair. This is not balanced. So you cannot come here and say that someone is attacking you. No, Palestinians are being attacked. Syrians are being attacked. Every week, Israel bombs Syria. We can't talk about that. This is insane. So, you know, it's not, you know, this shift with big tech companies as social media gets bigger, as technology advances, you know, they're pushing harder for censorship. And don't get me wrong, it's not just Israel, right? So, I mean, even Democrats, if you look at Democrats, for example, they love censorship about everything, right? For example, when Hunter Biden, this laptop thing, you know, they tried to call it Russian disinformation, right? Anyone they don't like who says things about the U.S. empire, they're like, oh, it's Russian propaganda, you know, this whole McCarthyite nonsense. They want to deplatform people and put labels under their social media accounts. Oh, this is Iran state media. What is that, right? So Democrats, you know, neoliberals, they love censorship. They love authoritarianism. That's why half the people who work at MSNBC and you know, CNN, they're CIA agents. They're former FBI agents. Also at Fox, right? You have Mike Pompeo, former CIA director, as a contributor. So they love censorship. They love authoritarianism. They're very loyal to the state. And this is a part of a much larger issue where you have corporations, tech corporations that are, you know, bending to pressure from, you know, politicians and people who are trying to, you know, impose bans on criticizing America or criticizing imperialism, criticizing Israel, whatever, right? All of this is not okay. So this kind of censorship, it's really bad. It's not what the internet was intended to be. But, you know, I just thought I'd highlight this because it is something I wanted to talk about back in May when they were doing this. But we did talk about very recently this thing with PayPal and stuff. I mean, it's just so revealing with Naftali Bennett, you know, seeing him like that. I mean, I'm not surprised. I just, when I see him saying this stuff in the video that they should edit Wikipedia, I'm not surprised. Yeah, like, of course he would say that. But that's the thing. You know, people say he's more right-wing than Netanyahu. Yeah, but it's not about that. Most Israelis would say the same thing, right? That's how it is. Just thought I'd give you a little bit of insight on that, you know, and if you go and look at mainstream media, not just social media, but mainstream media, they also don't criticize Israel. You can't go on Fox News or CNN or BBC and criticize Israel. This is taboo. They're trying to do the same thing on social media. They want to crush Palestinian voices, Syrian voices. They want everyone to just accept being occupied and bombed the whole time. And of course, don't get me wrong, Palestinians have it way worse, of course. But still, Syria is also under illegal occupation. This is a fact. So, you know, as long as this land is being illegally occupied, as long as Palestinians are being denied their human rights, denied a state, their resources, everything that has been taken from them, their land, their futures, this is unacceptable. You can't come here and then play the victim. Come on, man. Just as one example, you know, when I was criticizing Israel for the annexation plan, Netanyahu wanted to annex another 30% of the West Bank and then some. Last year in 2020, all of a sudden my YouTube channel got demonetized for some bogus reason. It said something about like copyright, like no clue, like nothing that made sense. And it happened just at that time. So what is that?